Allemagne 1813, a French war game published by Exasim, but fear not, the game comes with English rules if you want. This is a new installment in the Days of Glory series, a series designed to simulate the great Napoleonic campaigns. In this installment, the players will be able to play different segments of the 1813 campaign, from small seasonal segments in shorter scenarios to larger scenarios such as Leipzig 1 to the entire campaign game. This is a game that can be played with a high degree of fog of war if the players choose to play with their counters face down as the rulebook recommends. But I personally do not enjoy that option very much. When it is about fog of war, I like my units to be represented by blocks that I can see all the time. With counters face down, I simply spend too much time double checking the stacks because I forget where my units are. Luckily enough, the game can also be played with the units face up, less fog of war, but still a lot of other things to do. And this is the way I played the game. So apart from this, let's take a closer look and see some of the other aspects of the game.
This is the map for the game. It is printed on paper, so I had to place it under a piece of plexiglass. It is a point-to-point map that looks pretty busy at first sight, but you get used to it. It is not that bad. Once you start playing the game, it is not too much of a problem. Also, the units do not blend in with the background too much, as I was afraid they would at first. What you see here is the setup for the Leipzig campaign, with the French players setting up in the middle of the map, but there are allied groups of units that are coming against the French from different directions, from here, and from here. Also, the allied player has a good number of reinforcements that are scheduled to come in, whereas the French player doesn't. Victory in this scenario is based on control of key cities such as Dresden, Weimar, Berlin, and also on victory points that are gained by capturing enemy leaders and or by winning large battles. If Napoleon is ever captured by the Allies, the game is over immediately in an Allied victory.
At the beginning of a player's turn, the active player rolls a die and adds to the number that was rolled the command value of the commander-in-chief. For the French army, the commander-in-chief is Napoleon, the command value is 4. This number determines the amount of commands that the player can use to execute actions on the board during that turn. A group can be activated as a single entity if it does not contain more than 2 infantry units and 1 cavalry, or 1 infantry and 2 cavalry, or 3 cavalry units. In other words, no more than 2 infantry units per stack. And reserve artillery and leaders do not count for stacking purposes. Units have several values printed on them. On top there is artillery bonus, then the small number is cohesion, and then cavalry bonus. Units do not have their movement factor printed on their counters, but all infantry and reserve artillery units have 6 movement points, and all generals and cavalry units have 8 movement points. You also have a roster where you will keep track of the current strength of your unit, so you will need to make photocopies of the roster. The number of boxes that you see by the name of each unit is not necessarily the starting strength of the unit. Each scenario will tell you what the starting strength is. That is going to be the maximum strength. So at the beginning of the game, you have to check and mark all the starting values. Then during the game, when a unit takes a hit, you cross off one of the boxes with an X. Then you can spend your command points to activate units, and the cost to activate each unit depends entirely on its position on the board. Units cost less command points to activate if they have a line of communication to the commander-in-chief, and a valid line of communication is of no more than 4 movement points. These roads here, indicated by dark lines, cost 1 movement point, and these are the connections here. The green ones are pro roads and they cost 2 movement points. A force without a leader but with a line of communication to the chief, such as this one, costs 1 command point to activate. If they do not have a line of communication, they cost 2. Units that are stacked with a leader cost 1 command point to activate if they do not have a line of communication, or they can be activated for free together with the leader if the leader has a line of communication to the commander-in-chief, and units activated by the commander-in-chief can be activated for free. When a stack of units of the active player moves adjacent to units of the non-active player can declare an interception attempt. He rolls a die that will be modified based on command status and terrain, and if the attempt is successful, the non-active player can move his units to intercept the moving units of the opponent. And in that case, of course, the moving unit has to stop immediately and combat will have to be resolved there during the movement phase. But if the non-active player is successful in his interception but is afraid of actually being attacked, the interception can be used to actually move away from the moving units of the active player. If you're moving to attack an opponent, you probably will want to reach that opponent from different directions during the same turn, because that will grant you a very good bonus during the combat phase. But after the active player completes his movement, before you resolve combat, there is another movement phase that is called marching to the sound of the guns. That phase allows the non-active player to add reinforcements to battles that are about to be resolved. In case the non-active player has units that are 1 or 2 movement points away from the area where the battle is taking place, then the non-active player can roll a die for each stack that is trying to join that battle. Again, there will be modifiers, and if the player is successful, then he can add those units to the battle. Combat is not very complicated, but it does require a little bit of homework. First, the players select one of their tactical options. Each player has an identical hand of 4 cards with value from 1 to 4. The players then reveal their selected tactical option. They add together their values, they divide by 2, and that tells them the number of battle rounds that they will have to fight. Then each player adds together the strength points of his units involved in the battle, and that is not immediate because units do not have their strength points printed on their counter. Players have to go back to the rosters and to see the present strength point of each unit. They reach a total, then before they can roll on the combat table, they have to take into account modifiers based on different things and modifiers that affect different aspects of the battle. There are modifiers to the number of strength points when you're counting your strength points, for example, cavalry units or disadvantage in mountains or defensive terrain. Then there are modifiers to the columns that you will use when you resolve the attack, and these are mainly based on maneuvering and or defensive devices. Then there are modifiers to the dice that are rolled, and these are based on different factors. The tactical bonus of the leader with the highest rank, for example. Difference in average cohesion. Yes, at the beginning of the combat you also have to calculate the average cohesion of your group, and once everything has been taken into account, both players roll at the same time. Attacks in each combat round are resolved simultaneously, and cross-referencing their strength points with the result, they obtain the number of hits that they inflict on the opponent. If the opponent loses more than 20% of his strength, the opponent must pass a morale test. If that is failed, the opponent must retreat. Every second and 4th round of combat, yes, not every round, there will be an artillery attack. Each player will add together his artillery bonus and then roll a die to see if it is possible to inflict some extra hits on the opponent. A battle will last until one of the two sides retreats because of a failed morale test, or until the players fight all of the rounds of combat that were decided by the tactical options at the beginning. If that happens, the side that lost the most strength points is the loser. If there is a tie, the attacker is the loser. And when a side has to retreat because the side lost the battle, the winner can roll on the pursuit table. The winner will add together the cavalry bonus of his units, roll a die, and see if the winner is able to inflict some extra hits on the retreating opponent. This is overall a nice game, and there are aspects that I like more and aspects that I like a little less. On the plus side, I definitely enjoyed the movement phase or phases because they're highly interactive. The non-active player is always keeping a close eye on everything that happens, trying to see if there are ways to exploit the movement of the opponent, and the active player, of course, has to take the possibility of that player's reaction into account, and that makes that phase really interactive and really dynamic. I like the command system, not just because it presents, of course, all sorts of decisions that you have to make when it comes to how you're going to invest your command points, but it also creates a nice sense of development and progression within the scenarios, because in many scenarios you will start with a lot of leaders around or close to the commander-in-chief, and that means that those leaders can be activated for very little expense of command points. So in the game you're spreading units around to do different things, and then you realize how it becomes increasingly complicated to keep your command net active. Because of this, I also suggest to use the supply rules that are optional, but they're really not complicated. You may try to cut the supply lines of the opponent to send units to occupy the supply source of the opponent, but that of course means that you're sending units far from the center of the action, so it can be something that really pays off, can really affect the opponent. At the same time, you're investing a big amount of command points to be able to send units far from the main action to execute that other maneuver. So it is something that I really enjoy. It is just a decision, a strategy that you can choose to use, but it is tough because it is very costly. So I enjoy to have that option. On the minus side, I would say that combat feels a little fiddly, a little procedural. You have to recalculate the strength of the units all the time. You have to take into account modifiers that are of different type. One about the columns, one about the strength, one about the dice. It just feels maybe unnecessarily complicated. There are events that will happen only in certain turns. Especially after the very streamlined, very smooth, very exciting movement phase, sometimes when you have to go around the board and resolve all the battles, that feels a little too static, a little too complicated. It just slows down the experience to me. So this is the only gripe that I have with the game. It is not a huge one, it is not a deal breaker by any means, but it is something that I experienced playing the game, and I think that may affect other players' enjoyment of the game. Overall, nevertheless, this clearly is a solid design. This is a system, this is a game that creates a very interesting, rich general image, a very nice narrative of the events depicted, and I believe that this is a game that fans of the Napoleonic Age can really enjoy.